Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our 2023 PD Extravaganza. We are here today to have a wonderful presentation from Miss Kathryn Rump, also known as Kalee, one of our Extempore Ambassadors for the past 2 years. It's been a joy to get to know her during that time and work with her as well. And here she's going to present with us on Adémas de y tú, modeling questions to extend conversation. Really looking forward to this one. I think Kalee will give us a lot that we can take away into our classes. So, Kalee, if you don't mind, go ahead, take it away. And let's start learning.
All right. Thank you so much, Grant. Thanks, everyone, for taking some time out of your afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. We were just discussing how time zones make it a little confusing sometimes when we're joining from Sketch. So I'm Kathryn Rump. Yes, I go by Kalee more often than not. I'm one of our Extempore ambassadors, and our topic today is Adémas de y tú, modeling questions so that students can extend conversation. So once again, I'm Kathryn Rump. I'm a Spanish teacher in Delaware, the first state. I'm very involved with our state organization, ACTFL. I was recognized as their Teacher of the Year in 2020. So that was a fun year to be Teacher of the Year, for sure. I help with their website and social media, and I also am currently serving as their president-elect. And I've worked for the past 2 years as an Extempore ambassador with Grant and our other ambassador, Dora. So it's been a real pleasure working with them, and I'm looking forward to what the new year brings. But I'm not ready to say goodbye to summer just yet. So this is where you can find all the resources that I'll give to you today, the different activities, the slides, and the extempore tasks. So it's our tiny URL. It's going to be on Sketch, or you can also use your phone with the QR code there. So feel free to take a look at those and follow along on the slides, or go to them later. They'll be there for you. So when we're talking about forming questions, I know we're all familiar with our ACTFL proficiency and the upside down cone. Personally, I kind of like the viewpoint of the path better, but the reason why I really wanted to focus on helping my students make questions is to help them get out of the novice kind of formulaic, just rote and memorized phrases, and starting to really create. And part of that is that they can ask and answer simple questions on familiar topics. And I saw that so often, and maybe you're familiar with this too, you're having a conversation with students, you're like asking them, how are you? What are your plans this weekend? And they'll tell you, and then they'll just be like, E2, and then meaning and you, and they never go beyond that and extend the conversation that way and ask you about yourself or ask another student about themselves. So I really wanted to find a way to encourage them to branch out of that kind of 1 or 2 word response when making a question, so that they can get up into more of that intermediate proficiency level. So I just saw the chat. Thanks, Jason, saying go Delaware. Appreciate that. All right, so I made sort of like a training plan then for my students, and we focused on vocabulary and context, having a variety of input in class. I did some student surveys, just very informally, to kind of gather where are they kind of at the beginning of our journey and where are they at the end and how can we keep going. And we focused, of course, on using communicative tasks and activities in class. When we talk about vocabulary and context, a lot of us nowadays are shifting away from the vocab list that's 50 words long, and you're just like, here you go ahead and memorize it. Now, I'm never opposed to a fun, Blukit or, Gimkit or something. But when we want to use our vocab in context that students are really seeing it and how it's used in the language, there's a couple different ways we can approach that. We can make sure we're using visuals so that they're connecting meaning with a picture. We can use TPR, total physical response, putting motion in with the action or with the word. not to be confused with TPRS. That's the teaching, reading, and proficiency through storytelling, which is something else. We can make sure we're using vocabulary in our communicative activities, using it in embedded reading. I love using embedded readings where you have just your basic vocab that you want to focus on in a reading task, and then you keep seeing it again and again with more detail each time. Using your focused vocabulary in writing, and of course, when appropriate, using cognate strategy. I also mentioned that I provided students with a variety of input. So I want to ask you all, what are some examples of input that you use in class? You can feel free to unmute and respond, or go ahead and respond in the chat. So we can just get kind of like a brainstorm going of what are the sorts of inputs that we might see in class. All right, we got Jason saying PQA, Soy Joe game with PQA. So personal question answers, it's a great way of getting input and also modeling questions. Podcasts with Duolingo. I really do enjoy the podcast from Duolingo too. Asking the story, Instagram stories, and images. These are all great ideas and ways that we can get input to our students with their vocabulary. And so many of you mentioned using things that incorporate visuals and things like that. Don't forget that you can have it be things like poems, infographics. I love to use infographics, songs and music. In reading, you mentioned, I think, well, Instagram stories, maybe that's more visual, even though it has the word stories in it. But reading, you could always do, reading short pieces of news, short stories. I see video shorts and things like that. Nice short segments that can hold students' attention and provide enough input for them to then grow on. And then once they've had their input, for our learners, they'll process, and the input that's meaningful for them will then start to be language that they acquire that they'll then start using for their output through their speaking and writing. At least, fingers crossed, that's our goal. So thanks everyone for your ideas there. I did mention I did surveys with the students very informally. I'm not a mathematician or anything like that. But I used like a little kind of pre-survey for them to show where their areas of need that helped me focus some of the activities that we did. And then at the end, I had a post survey that was able to show a little bit of the student growth and reflection and where we can go from there so that I can help them continue to use questions in class in order to exchange information. So when we talk about communicative activities, there are 3 key features. One of them is that there's an information gap. So person A and person B have different sets of information and they need to exchange it somehow, whether it's that I don't know what time you want to meet up for the weekend, or I'm asking you to give me directions on how to get to the bookstore. The second feature is that there's choice, meaning that your answer isn't going to be rote or memorized. There's a choice in how you might respond, what you might say. And lastly, the third feature is feedback, not necessarily meaning that later on you're going to get a grade from your... Is there a question?
I think you could keep going.
All right, no problem. So with the feedback, not meaning necessarily that you're going to get a grade from your teacher, but that in that moment when you're doing the activity, you'll get feedback based on were you understood by the listener or not. So if you're talking about your weekend plans and then the person responds by telling you what time they woke up that morning, maybe you weren't necessarily understood. And if you're looking for more about communicative activities, I just have to give Grant a quick shout out. He did a presentation earlier this week during the Extempore PD, and you'll want to probably go and check it out if you weren't there, or even if you were, because you had a lot of great ideas and how you can use communicative activities and tasks in class. All right, so quick other discussion. How do you incorporate questions and extending conversations in your class? That's kind of part A. And then why are questions important? So again, you can unmute if you want to, or if you're more comfortable in the chat, either way. Oh, and there's more to come on Friday, thinking back to that communicative.
I'm gonna just say it out loud. I sometimes, if we're learning a particular unit in class, I'm always the one asking questions. So what I create a Google Doc, and so that everybody has their own individual one, and then I take a look at what the students are writing. And so the students who have the best questions, usually I pair them up with someone who has like questions like in the middle, not bad, but they just need to be better worded. So I pair them up to ask each other questions about that material. So it's not rehearsed. They don't know in advance what the questions are going to be. And that's how I incorporate questions where I'm not asking them all the time.
Oh, well, that's a great idea, to pair kind of a stronger student with someone who needs a little bit of help, get them working together and sharing ideas. I see that we have checking for comprehension and personalizing. Bingo, Umano. Oh yeah, I love that. I call it find someone who, but it's kind of the same idea. Get them up, get them talking. These are great ways that you can kind of ask students to use questions and extend conversations. So why are questions important? I see Grant's got a little, they're great ways for students to get to know one another. That's true. Leading to interpersonal. Dora, what do you think? I see your hand is up.
Yes, well, I think questions are important because the kind of keep the students on check. Are you a good listener? The student have to pay attention, and of course, it reinforces participation. Let it be student-teacher or student-student. So I think that's why it's important. Of course, it also furthers the conversation, because if you don't have to ask questions, then the conversation will just be short. So kind of extend that conversation.
Right. If you're just like, hey, how are you? And I'm like, good. And then I don't say anything else, our conversation's over.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. It's gonna make you get to know one another, leading to interpersonal, get some output. How good a listener are you? And I see JK on the phone said listening comprehension. Students' answer can show their level of comprehension. That's true. And propose students to create question bank for the term. Oh, very good. All right. So beyond just getting to know one another and showing what a great listener you are, questions in world languages are important because they, of course, serve our purpose to communicate. You want to gather information as you need it. It gives you grammar and context. It shows the use of, our word order in a question. It focuses sometimes on the different verb forms. Are you talking to one person? Are you talking to more than one? Are you talking about what you did or are going to do or are doing right now? It piques your curiosity. You want to find out more. If you're looking at an interesting image and you're trying to gather information about it, or you just saw a really cool video and you want to know more, you have to ask some questions about it. Many of you mentioned participation, which is great because you need to be an active participant in your life, and you have to communicate and ask questions that way. And also some ownership and learning. If your questions in the class help drive what the teacher does or what your peers do and directs the lesson that way, that can give you some ownership. And one of the ways that you might use questions in world languages is through QFT, which is a question formula technique. And just by a quick show of hands, is anyone familiar or heard of QFT before? You might already use it and not realize that you're using it. Because as I kind of looked a little further into it, Dora saying, yeah, she's used it. I realized like, hey, I think I've done this and I just didn't know that it had this name QFT. So essentially QFT is brainstorming to create and then later improve your questions. So you're given some topic, says here some common sources are, a statement, whether it's an opinion, a fact, you're given an image, a place, something to look at, something that you're going to focus on, and then you just start creating questions about it. Who, what, where, when, why, how, and you're writing them all down. And you as the teacher could, maybe show your students an image, or you've just listened to a song and you're going to create a whole bunch of questions, and just there's no wrong question. You're just going to write them all down with your class. And then from there, go back and help them tweak. Oh, how would this one look? How could we rephrase it? Oh, this one's not quite clear. This one's a great example. And then kind of show them examples of how questions are formed, but not correcting or necessarily judging them up front as you're just kind of like spitballing and asking them all. So I realized it's like, oh, I kind of do this a lot when we do like an image and I want them to kind of question about it before we kind of delve into like a unit. I use that a lot of the times as like a kind of way to open up a unit and get them thinking about what we're going to be doing. So, excuse me, Judith Wilson says that all learning starts with a question. In the language classroom, we're all working towards learning a new language by mastering the art of communication through exchange of information. So again, that's going back to that information gap. Both children and adults naturally learn about the world by observing, testing, and asking why. So if you're working with students, or if you have your own children, you get probably a couple hundred questions a day. Often why? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? How do I do this? And all those types of questions are ways where someone's going to work on gaining knowledge and work on hopefully mastering what they're doing. So back to the survey that I mentioned, it was, again, very informal. I would just kind of like, here, guys, take this little survey as part of your warm up today. So I started off with, here's our pregame stats, okay, before we get ready for the big game. And I just wanted to know, first of all, how well do you know the question words in Spanish? Because maybe they weren't even really familiar. And I did this primarily with my students in level 2. So we see on a scale of 1 being not comfortable at all to 4 being super comfortable, we got a lot of 2s and 3s. All right, so maybe part of what we need to do is focus on also knowing the question words. Then, all right, I asked them, how well do you feel you can respond to written questions? And okay, 60% of them are saying pretty easily, maybe some hesitation, because you can see that a 4 is I can respond easily, no hesitation. And some of them are down here in 2. All right. How well do you feel you can create a written question? And we see it shifting more towards 2s, less 3s, only a couple 4s, still no 1s, so that's good. But a lot of more of them are saying I'm not as easily, and I'm gonna maybe struggle a little bit with creating a written question. Then we moved on to, I asked them about responding to spoken questions, and you can see it jumped up 3s. Okay, they're feeling pretty familiar. I'm pretty good on familiar topics. 42 or like 43% are saying, yeah, pretty good with responding to spoken. 40% of 2s, and we got a 4. All right. And several are on a 1. They're like, I'm not responding to any spoken questions. And then our last question was, how well do you feel you can create a spoken question like in a conversation? And we'll see 60% of them are saying, I'm not comfortable, not very comfortable. And then we even got 11% like not at all. So this gave me an idea of where we're headed, where we're starting as a base point. All right, so we're going to get warmed up. I got my game plan, I got my pregame stats, and now I'm like, okay, we're going to be getting ready for, you know, hopefully the championship. So I started off with being like, okay, I want you all to watch this video on how our questions formed. So I gave them a basic video. They watched this one by Maestro Kaplan, and just want a quick search on YouTube. I was able to find, we got French, okay, and we got Chinese, German. So it was pretty easy to find some short videos on, I know, Grant, that she is Grace Mandarin. That's how I found her, it's because I've seen you feature one of her videos before. So I was like, all right, this will just give them a basic little bit of knowledge on the formation of questions. What kind of questions are there? Yes, no, either or, open-ended, one that only has one correct answer. And what does it look like when we're using our target language, which in our class is Spanish. So after we did that, whoopsie, went back a little bit too far. We are past here. Sorry, getting warmed up. Sorry about that. Then I was like, okay, now we're going to practice some questions that you guys didn't create, but you're going to just be asking, and using questions. So we did some speed dating with quiz trade. We're going to take a look at that, and the good old information gap. And these are examples of cooperative or collaborative learning structures. I don't know if you've ever heard them referred to that way, but our school is really into having us do these cooperative learning structures. And you probably do them all the time without thinking about what fancy name should I give this? Things like turn and talk, or inside circle, outside circle, even think, pair, and share. All of those are examples of cooperative learning structures because you're relying on someone else to help you with the information. So let's take a look at some quiz trade. So in this, our topic was la ropa, talking about what you wear. So in this activity, students would fold the page the long way, and they would have their 10 questions here. And I would give everyone a paper clip, and you can put your paper clip on any question to start. I would first make sure that they knew what the questions meant. We would go over how they were formed, and then we would be ready to start. They would have their paper folded, they'd have their paper clip ready to go. Then I usually set a timer and some kind of criteria for who's going to ask first. So I have them get up, walk around, find someone and pair up. And then usually it's like the shorter person or a person with longer hair, you're going to ask first and the other responds, and then they switch roles. So if my paperclip were on B, I would ask the person, if I were person A, ¿Qué ropa llevas cuando hace frío? And my partner's like, oh, maybe they don't know how to respond. On the other side, they have a little helper phrase here to get them going. So cuando hace frío, llevo una chaqueta, un abrigo, or whatever it is. Then my partner is going to ask me their question. So let's say they had their paperclip on letter H. My partner asked me, ¿Qué ropa llevas cuando vas a la escuela? I respond, and then I have them switch where their paperclip was. So now I had mine at letter B. I'm going to move mine to H, and my partner will put theirs at B, and then they say adios and go and find someone new. I usually have them do this for about 5 or 6 minutes so that they hopefully interact with at least 5 to 6 people. So that's one example of kind of like the speed dating or get to know you sort of thing. And they don't have to create a question. You saw that I already had written them for them, but they're using them in context multiple times.
Very quickly, I just want to understand the activity. So you pair them, you say quiz trade. That means that they quiz twice, and they change the clip to whatever question.
Correct.
It's so I have the clip in whatever question I want, and that's what I ask my partner, and then my partner has his clip in another question, and he asks me. and then you
Correct.
say trade, and that when you say trade, that means they change partner.
The trade is actually that you trade questions. Yes,
Yeah.
not papers. You just move your paper clip to where theirs was. So this is kind of
I
like,
got you. Okay.
yeah. Originally, you can do this two ways. You can do this the way I just showed, which is a little less prep work on the teacher, because otherwise the trade part is that you each have only one question on a slip and you literally do trade papers, but then you have to have like 40 papers cut out. And it's
Right.
easier to just be like, here's your one paper, fold it in half. So yeah, thank you for that question.
And so when you say fold it in half, is that
I would have them, if you're looking at the paper now, I would have them fold it the long way so that a question is here and I can ask it, but then like it's folded like the long way.
half, like hot dog style?
Hot dog, yes. And then on the back, I have the little kind of sentence helper for how you start your response. If
Okay.
you or your partner are like, I don't know how to respond to this question.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Now the other is information gap. And so here we have, this one was about sports and leisure or like fun activities. They're looking at the list of their students here. There's a persona A, persona B, and they have to speak with the other to get information. Now in this one, I made it so there's a little secret persona C, which is the teacher, meaning they had to come and actually talk with me as well. So again, they don't have to create any questions here. They're just see them in context, asking their name, how old is the person, where are they from? Now these last two aren't actually a full sentence. So I pointed that out to the students and we kind of worked together like, how would we make this into a full sentence? Because su deporte favorito is not a full sentence. How could we make that an actual whole question? And we kind of brainstormed and then they added it in. It's not there because I just couldn't fit it on the page and have it look how I wanted it. But it was a nice way to kind of make them stop and think. And then again, they got up. They didn't have to necessarily work with multiple people, just 1, 2, and then myself is that secret number 3. So they had to come and talk with me afterwards. And then from this one, I have a follow-up activity that they had to do on extempore, and we're going to take a look at it here. So straightforward, use the information that you gathered in the information gap discussion and summarize what you know about the 3 students. And of course, it's asking them to speak in Spanish. So hopefully not too challenging once they were able to gather the information and then start to summarize. Yes, we got extempore. And then, yeah, just a simple follow-up, like, did you hopefully do the work and then understand what you learned about our 3 students here? And you could do something similar too with the speed dating. Ask them to even have jotted down what some of their partners said and then follow up by making a comparison with a partner or summarizing what you learned about people in class. So there's always a way to take the activities you do and make an extension of it to make sure that they're kind of putting an end on it before you move on. Another example we're going to take a look at with extempore doesn't really have anything to do with these 2 that I just showed you, but it's another way that I had the students focus on responding and creating questions. And these were all at first written response. So they were presented with this graphic that I made either on Google Slides or maybe I used Canva. And they have 4 students with a name, age. This was about daily routine. So it was whatever activity that they did and the time that they did it. And they just have 5 questions. So 5 questions are available to them. You can see the little symbol there means it's going to be writing. This is an example of one of the questions that I created. Use the graphic to respond to the question in Spanish with a full sentence, ¿A qué hora María se duerme? And then after they've done the ones that I created for them, they get to one where they're going to create, again, using that same graphic, create questions in Spanish, write at least 3 questions, including variety. So they might focus on a who, what time, either or yes, no type questions. And then I looked at their answers after, because Extempore gives you kind of the grade book. You can go in and provide feedback. And at this point, I wasn't really looking for like specifically being like, oh, you didn't write this verb form correctly. I just wanted to see what they came up with without Google Translate. And then it helped form like, okay, where are we going to go from here? So this was getting warmed up. How did we kind of introduce more questions, start using them and seeing them in context, and then start to create some using Extempore? All right, so from there, now are we ready to play? Maybe not yet, but we're getting there. Here I had them, I know, Google Translate is just, and then like, oh, how'd you know I used it, buddy? It's so obvious, but that's a whole other presentation. That's true. There's no copy and paste on Extempore, which there's a couple ways you can create more of a more secure testing. You can also make it so you'll know if they navigate away. So if you navigate away like once, maybe you accidentally clicked away, but if you do it like 30 times, it's probably telling. So as we were going on, and now I want them to get more comfortable with seeing input and creating questions about it, different kinds of input. So here we're going to see, I had them read some blogs and create questions, and then they had to do some listening. So for the blogs, and of course you can modify the instructions anyway as would fit your needs and your class. I had them read each blog entry. There are 4. And when we do reading like this, I tell them, look for words that you know. It's not like a get hung up on, oh, I didn't understand one word right in the middle. It's more of, did you understand the important phrases that we've been working on in class, and get a general idea of, you know, this one was again about daily routine. So what do the people do, you know, morning, daytime, and nighttime ish? Can you get that idea? So I had them read each blog entry and create an original question about the blogger's daily routine, thinking of like maybe what's their name or what time, or putting in order things. Then I had them work with a partner, take turns asking each other the questions that you created and respond. And then finally, in a short video, they had to choose one of the 4 bloggers and summarize their daily routine and compare it with their own, with similarities and differences. So the 4 blogs you can see, I just like screenshotted them off of somewhere and put them in these slides. So it was from like a real blog that I found somewhere. And then the students were able to kind of explore. I had them like working in the pairs, so they could ask and answer the questions. This was an activity where I would be kind of walking around the room, seeing what they were doing and giving them some ideas and feedback as they're working. But this was so that they could become more comfortable creating questions about something that they read. And then this extempore activity here, the activity was about going shopping. So fui de compras. And then they had to listen and make questions. So the first 4 are actually, this little symbol means multiple choice. So I created some multiple choice questions for them just to get them listening to the audio and understanding what it was about before they created the questions about it. Here's an example of one of the multiple choice questions. Listen to the audio and choose the question that's not answered in the audio. This is one of my new favorite kind of multiple choice questions to ask. And so they're listening for like, which of these basically is false or unanswerable based on the text. I did create the audio. This one won't play just because this is a screenshot off of Extempore, but I created the audio, but it could be something that you import. Extempore lets you upload audio or record your own right into the program. You can upload YouTube. You can do, or like your own videos, and you can do pictures. So I had them familiarize themselves with the audio. And then they had to answer the questions. And then finally, here they had to say their questions out loud. So even if they had already written them down, they had to say them aloud, considering these types of questions: quién, who, qué, what, a dónde, where, to where, cuándo, when, and por qué, why. And then they had to respond saying their questions out loud. All right, then we get to the final round. So part of what it seems is the most difficult for the students is creating questions by speaking during a conversation. So ultimately, I just wanted them to be able to create a question that they say out loud, working towards being able to be more spontaneous. The kind of app that I use for recording my voice is usually just directly into Extempore itself. If it's longer and I want to be able to possibly like trim it, or if I know there's going to be like a long pause while I'm getting some stuff together and then, you know, pulling up a script or whatever, I really like one that's called Online Voice Recorder. But all of these screenshots here with the blue questions and everything, these are all from Extempore. So for our final round, I wanted them to be able to produce or give more language. So I had them work, these aren't necessarily related to each other. They're just two examples because the Mad Libs, well, actually the Mad Libs is about shopping. And then this last tier is about shopping. So I had of Mad Libs that I made for them, working in groups of 2. And you could, again, come up with some criteria if they're like, I don't know who person A or B should be. You know, it can be silly. Whose birthday is next? Who woke up earlier? Who lives closer to the school? So person A is going to be reading aloud, and B is filling in the questions with the appropriate answer. In this case, it was sometimes a noun or a verb. So this one does focus a little bit on grammar because we were practicing also on narrating in the past and what you did. Then I asked them to draw a comic of whatever their story was about. So even though I had mostly written it, they still needed to understand what it was. And then at the end, they had to show off their comic in a short video and kind of summarize their story in Spanish. So they're creating a story about that they went shopping with a famous person and they needed to buy whatever clothing for an occasion. They don't find it. They have to go somewhere else. Then they went out to eat. And then finally, they get home, but they're late for the party. And then they drew it and then made their video of the drawing. For some of my classes, this was very difficult because they couldn't come up with the words to fill in the blank. So I also created this exact same script as like a roll the dice story where you just rolled the dice, and then for like name of a famous person here, you didn't have to think of one, you would just roll, and if you got a 3, it was Taylor Swift. And so it was less taxing as far as coming up with an original thought and idea. So it was easier, and they weren't necessarily coming up with their own target language, but then they still had to do the drawing and show that they comprehended the story. So it just kind of depended on where was the class at. And when I saw that classes were really struggling with this, I created the like roll the dice one. That's a great question. So Jason's asking, regarding Extempore, is there compatibility with Google Slides or things like GimKit It's tiring to recreate the same content and so that might be a question if we just hold off on it and we'll answer that at the end. I know Grant would be able to answer that better than I. All right. And then for my final round where they're answering, creating, and describing, this was all them creating the questions. And it's another one of, I gave them a graphic. It's the people, where did they go shopping and when? And then you can see, I told them whatever they bought is like what they're wearing in the picture. So we got Target. This place, First and Little, is like a local little boutique on the main street here in our town. Macy's, and then the Nike store. They were presented with 6 questions. This little symbol with the microphone means they're going to be speaking. So they had to voice a question out loud. And then this little symbol is video. They had to create a video at the end. So questions 1 through 5 were all that they had to create an original question, record them speaking about our picture here. Questions like what, who, to where, or when. And then, oops. At the end, they had a free talk where they could say as much as they can in our target language, Spanish, about the picture. So essentially describing where they went, when, and what they bought.
And Kathryn, do you check all this info of the students? So you go back to Extempore and just grade it?
I do. So maybe not every single thing, but I do go back and listen or check each of the questions. So then I can see, are the students doing the work? And in this particular one, I probably checked a couple of their questions. And then really I was focused more on like the free talk at the end and seeing what they said. So it's kind of up to you. What exactly do you feel you need or want to grade or check? You can leave feedback there in the grade book. It can be written. You can upload a video of your feedback, or it can just be audio as well.
Is this graded? Is it graded for completion, or is it graded how well they formulated the questions?
In this case, it was still completion, and then I was like kind of typing like, oh, like remember, you know, the word order or things like that. Giving them feedback. Yes, rubrics are now also available. I think it's a newer feature, so you can also incorporate your rubrics right there in Extempore.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. So you can see, I kind of tried to show you sort of like a scaffolding of like, they're doing questions where they're just speaking ones I wrote, then they're starting to respond to ones I wrote and then create some of their own through writing. Then they were listening and creating and starting to speak questions. So they were totally making them up and doing a free talk. So I tried to show it was a kind of a scaffolded process. And question for you is, how do you provide scaffolding, not necessarily for questions, but in general, what are some ways that you provide scaffolding in your classes? And feel free to go in the chat or you can unmute. Grant says sentence starters and rejoinders. I love sentence starters. You can see I used them on my quiz trade.
I think just having a word wall, if you're lucky enough to have a classroom, which we don't always, but having a word wall, and the way I organize my word wall is with interrogatives, with posters, you know, the posters you can get from different places or make your own. And then since I only see my students once a week, I'm in elementary, 45 minutes once a week, I scaffold by providing the answers that they've already begun to acquire to those question words. So underneath like quien, some basic things would be una persona, un monstruo, un niño, mama, papa, the easier words that come up in the very beginning, not as a prescriptive word list, but as a descriptive. These are words that we've been exposed to and we've begun to acquire. And that really gets them talking more, because as I'm asking questions, they're looking up at those question words and the vocabulary they may need is there. Also, when they give a question, when they create their own question, I'll put it up on the board. I ring a bell and I celebrate because they're producing language. When students produce a question, yay. And I often will give in 5th grade, which is like the second year, I'll give puntos de piñata for any new question that we haven't heard that day that's used in a PQA kind of follow-up. So if you say, that you went to the store and you bought a jacket, a student might say, oh, what color? What color jacket? If what color had already been asked, it's not a point. But if it's what color jacket or what color jacket did you buy? Boom, that's a punto de piñata. So it makes it kind of a game for them to play and get more information.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. I like that idea of having not just a list of the questions, but like pertinent words kind of under each. That's a really good idea. I think I'm going to have to borrow that one. Yeah, so word walls for sure. I always kind of like to, at the beginning of the year, reassess like, how did, these kind of basic posters I have work, or did the students refer to them, or were they just kind of there? Another way is you might teach them how to circumlocute a little bit, like, oh, es una persona, es un objeto, es una acción. So there's different ways. And then you've mentioned PQAs a couple of times. One of the activities, it's a great way to introduce questions and also getting to know each other. And you mentioned making the class personalized earlier, is by doing PQA with like person of the day or star of the day, where you interview someone and kind of learn about them that way. And then you're seeing the same kind of questions like over and over, and you can kind of vary them by, your current topic in class and things like that. But person of the day or special person interviews, those are always great for just getting those repetitious, like get to know you type questions. All righty, we're coming up to the end here. So here's our game analysis. Coming back to my post survey, it was the same questions. And I'm sure mathematically it matters that a different amount of people answered the first survey versus the ending survey, but I didn't want to delve into relearning statistics that day. So this is just the raw data that the Google form gave me. So you can see, whereas how well do I know the question words? It did go up. Okay, so more people did respond in the 3s than before, and more are in the 4s. And then when we concentrate more on how well do you feel you can respond to written questions, before, where 3 of them had, let's see, 37%, and now it's up to 54. So that's pretty good. And only 4 of them had been, number 4, so meaning the most easily, was only 6%, and now we're up to 29. So that's good. They're feeling more comfortable responding to questions. And then more comfortable, let's see, creating written questions. So now creating their own. We can see that 3, for number 3, we have 45.8, so like 46%, whereas before it was, let's see, this is creating a written one, it was only 37, so that's higher. And more of them are at 4. I think there was only like very low, it was like 4% before. And then more of them possibly feeling better with responding to spoken. And then if we go down here to, because our focus was creating questions, how well do you feel you can create a spoken question? Let's see, I had written it down. So 58% are on a 2, whereas before it was 60. So it's down a little bit. And then 29% of them gave a 3, whereas it was 26 before. And then only 3% were on a 4 before, and now it's 8. So it did trend up just a tiny bit, which was good, because that was our overall goal, was through all these kind of activities that you're doing, you're focusing on listening to questions, reading questions that are already written, responding to them, and then creating your own. I wanted them to be able to feel more comfortable making their own questions, especially when they're in a dialogue. But there's always room for improvement. So moving forward, they were asking, because I also asked for some written response, like, do you feel the activities we did helped, and how can you continue to improve? They wanted just more examples and more practice, which, you know, as they're continuing, hopefully on their journey through Spanish, they're going to keep seeing more and more as they are exposed to more language. And I think personally for me, I just have to make sure that I make it more clear that I really want to hear them asking questions back and forth to each other and to me, instead of just being like E2. So just encouraging more questioning and extending those questions in class. And Dora says, slowly moving from basic questions to open-ended, right? So that you have more of a free-flowing kind of dialogue versus like, what did you eat yesterday? And talking more about bigger topics like, how did you go about planning your meal, or things like that. All right, so we're coming kind of to the end here. Quick last discussion. Think of a unit that you do now, and how might you help your students extend their conversations about that particular unit in class? And this is another chance to unmute and respond, or feel free to answer in the chat.
I like what you were doing with the daily routines, what you did with the daily routines and the images and things like that. So thank you for sharing everything, because I think I'm going to take a look at it and rethink and reimagine the start of the Spanish 2 this year. That looks a lot. I mean, mine is not bad, but it's not awesome. Yours looks awesome. So I'm going to try and make it as close to awesome as I can possibly make it. Level 2, being a native speaker, level 2 is where I struggle, the lower levels to teach. 4 and up, I'm like, I fly, but in level 2, I struggle so much, and I liked what you had. And I think for the students, especially for the games that you had, and the other person that I saw earlier today, that's going to help me get the kids more engaged.
Oh, thank you. And any other ideas, or, you know, daily routine is a topic I feel like I've taught a lot. So please feel free to reach out, and we can share ideas. Any other thoughts on how you might extend conversations, or how you might approach a unit this coming year? If your brain's not on school yet, that's okay too. All right, Jason saying flip pals, awesome. So they have a chance to communicate with a purpose, having your interested audience, finding commonalities. Yeah, I feel like I tried flip pals and then COVID happened, so it didn't really ever come to fruition. So hopefully, maybe in the future, flip pals will be back. Giselle's always on school brain break. I gotcha. All right, so just to wrap up, again, thank you all so much for coming today and for listening and giving me some thoughts to think on, and, you know, sharing your ideas. I really appreciate it. Let's see. And if we can't find it, well, we'll make sure you get the slides. So no worries. This is my email. You can keep in touch. You can get in touch with me on Twitter or Instagram. That's my username, Senora Rump Spanish. The little QR code here, this is just a little plug for the Facebook group that I help to run the discussion. That's Extempore Teachers. So I would love to see some more members to help our group grow. And it doesn't work, the one at the beginning. Okay, well, thank you. I will make sure I edit that too. So thank you. And then the link that Grant's giving you should give you access. And yes, we're coming up to the survey link, of course. here we go. Thanks again for attending. Make sure you complete the survey. And again, I just really appreciate you being here today. I hope you got some fun takeaways that you can use when your school year starts, and, you know, take all that brain break you need, and then you can hit the ground running this fall. So thanks again, everyone.